It wasn't a quest for anything special. That's the part that haunts me the most, I think. The sheer, mundane simplicity of how it all began. I was just killing time on a drizzly Tuesday afternoon, the kind of grey, listless day that makes the world feel like a faded photograph. My life had been feeling that way too, lately. A series of muted tones, a predictable loop of work, microwave dinners, and the faint, electronic glow of a laptop screen in a too-quiet apartment. The antique shop was called Odds and Endings, a name that now feels like a sick joke. It was tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up storefront, a place I'd passed 100 times and never given a second glance. But the rain was coming down harder, and the warm, dusty light spilling from its windows promised a temporary shelter from the damp. A bell, tarnished with age, jingled a dissonant chime as I pushed the door open. The air inside was thick, a potent cocktail of old wood, lemon polish, and the sweet, cloying scent of decay. It was the smell of forgotten things. The shop was a labyrinth, a canyon of towering shelves and overstuffed cabinets, every surface groaning under the weight of history. Porcelain dolls with vacant eyes stared out from glass cases, their smiles fixed and sinister. Tarnished silverware lay in tangled heaps. Framed portraits of stern-faced strangers watched my progress with painted indifference. I was about to leave, feeling strangely claustrophobic, when I saw it. It was sitting on a low, rickety shelf in the very back, half hidden behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines. A vase. It was captivating. About a foot tall, carved not from porcelain or clay, but from a dark, smoky wood that seemed to drink the light. The surface wasn't smooth. It was intricately carved with a swirling, hypnotic pattern that wasn't quite vines, nor was it waves. As I ran my fingers over it, the grooves felt less like carvings and more like scars, a topography of ancient pain. The pattern coiled around the entire vessel, pulling the eye downward into its dark, open mouth. It felt cold to the touch, a deep, seeping chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. There was no price tag. An old man I hadn't noticed before emerged from behind a velvet curtain, moving with a silence that was unnerving. He was gaunt, his skin like parchment stretched over a delicate frame. His eyes, however, were a startling watery blue, and they fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. "A discerning eye," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "It's a unique piece, Anatolian, very old." "How much?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the hushed space. He named a figure that was laughably low. I should have been suspicious. Nothing in this city, not even a piece of junk, came that cheap. But a possessiveness had already taken root in me. I wanted the vase. I needed it. It felt like it was meant for me. "I'll take it," I said, pulling out my wallet. As he wrapped it in brittle yellow newspaper, his long, bony fingers lingering on the wood, he looked at me again. "It has a presence, doesn't it? It likes a quiet home." I dismissed it as the kind of eccentric sales pitch you'd expect from a place like this. I paid, took the clumsily wrapped package, and stepped back out into the rain. The warm, damp air a relief after the shop's stagnant atmosphere. I felt a strange thrill, a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years. I was carrying a piece of history, a beautiful, mysterious artifact. I placed it on the mantelpiece in my living room the moment I got home. It looked perfect there, a dark, elegant centerpiece against the bland beige wall. It belonged. That was the first night the whispers started. I was in that hazy state between wakefulness and sleep, the city's nocturnal hum a distant lullaby. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through a crack in the window frame, or the pipes groaning in the walls. But I soon realized it was neither. It was a voice, or something mimicking a voice. It was faint, a sibilant rustle like dry leaves skittering across pavement, just on the edge of comprehension. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It seemed to emanate from the very air in the room, coiling around me like a phantom serpent. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was pitch black, the digital clock on my bedside table reading 3:07 a.m. The whispering stopped the instant I was fully awake. Silence, thick and heavy, pressed in on my eardrums. I told myself it was a dream, a hypnagogic hallucination. I'd been stressed at work. It was my imagination, fueled by the strange atmosphere of the antique shop. But the next night, it happened again. 3:07 a.m. The same soft, insidious whispering. This time, I strained to listen, my body rigid with fear. I couldn't make out words, not exactly. It was more a series of sounds, of promises and lamentations spoken in a language I'd never heard, but somehow understood on a primal level. It spoke of dry earth, of deep, lightless places, of a loneliness so vast it could swallow stars. And it was coming from the living room. I didn't get out of bed. I pulled the covers over my head like a child, the cold sweat soaking my pajamas, and waited for dawn. The following days were shrouded in a growing unease. I started to notice other things. The air around the vase was always several degrees colder. My small apartment, once a comfortable temperature, now felt perpetually chilly. I'd find myself staring at the vase for minutes on end, lost in the convoluted patterns of its carving. They seemed to shift when I looked away, the swirls tightening, the grooves deepening. One evening, I came home from work to a foul smell. It was a sweet, meaty odor, like spoiled milk and rotting flowers. I tore the apartment apart, convinced a mouse had died in the walls. I found nothing. The smell was strongest near the mantelpiece. I picked up the vase, its cold wood feeling almost alive in my hands, and sniffed it. The stench was overwhelming, a physical blow that made me gag and stumble back. I almost dropped the damn thing, but as I set it down, the smell vanished completely. The air was clean again. I was losing my mind. That was the only explanation. A week after I bought it, the nightmares began. Vivid, technicolor horrors that felt more real than my waking life. I was always in a dark, dusty place, a labyrinth of catacombs, or perhaps the inside of a gigantic petrified hive. The whispering was there, louder now, a chorus of those same dry, rustling voices. They weren't just whispering to me, they were whispering about me. They spoke of my bones, how they would look cleaned and polished. They spoke of the hollow spaces inside me, and how they longed to fill them. I'd wake up screaming, my throat raw, the phantom sensation of centipedes crawling under my skin. The physical changes started slowly. I began to lose weight I couldn't afford to lose. My cheeks grew hollow, my eyes receding into dark, bruised sockets. A persistent dry cough racked my frame. I was always tired, a fatigue that sleep only seemed to worsen. My reflection in the mirror became that of a stranger, a gaunt, haunted man piece at an accelerated rate. I knew, with a certainty that was as cold as the vase itself, that it was the source. It was sucking the life out of me, feeding on my vitality. The thought should have filled me with a decisive, clear-headed rage. It should have made me grab the thing, march it to the dumpster, and be done with it. But I didn't. A part of me, a part that was growing stronger every day, was terrified of being separated from it. The whispers had started to include my name. Dan, they would sigh, a sound of terrible affection. Stay with us, Dan. We are so lonely. The vase was no longer just an object. It was a relationship, a toxic, parasitic, but deeply intimate relationship. The thought of its absence created a panic in me that was worse than the fear of its presence. One afternoon, driven by a desperate need for answers, I went back to odds and endings. The laundromat was there, churning away. The boarded-up storefront was still boarded up, but the space where the antique shop had been was just a vacant, dusty storefront. The windows were grimy and bare, the door locked with a heavy, modern padlock. Peering through the glass, I saw an empty room, its floor littered with debris. There was no sign it had ever been a shop. No shelves, no counter, no gaunt old man. It looked as if it had been abandoned for a decade. A cold dread, far deeper than any I'd felt before, settled in my gut. There was no going back. There was no returning the cursed thing. I was stuck with it. That night, the phenomena escalated. I was woken not by whispers, but by a sound from the living room. A soft, scraping noise. Then a thump. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed, my hands slick with sweat. My heart was a wild, frantic drum against my ribs. I crept down the short hallway, the floorboards cold under my bare feet. The living room was dark, but a sliver of moonlight from the window fell across the mantelpiece. The vase was gone. My eyes scanned the darkness, and I saw it. It was on the floor, in the middle of the room. It hadn't just fallen. It was upright, as if it had been placed there. The scraping sound started again. I fumbled for the light switch, flooding the room with a harsh fluorescent glare. The vase was moving. It was tilting back and forth, a slow, rhythmic rocking. With each forward tilt, it scraped against the wooden floor. As I watched, frozen in terror, the movement became more pronounced. It was no longer just rocking, it was in shuddering. A fine black dust, like soot or powdered bone, began to seep from the carvings on its surface. Then, the whispers erupted, not as a soft rustle, but as a deafening roar inside my head. They were no longer ambiguous. They were a command. Look, inside. My body was no longer my own. I took a step forward, then another, my limbs moving with a marionette's jerky obedience. The bat fell from my numb fingers with a clatter I barely heard. I knelt before the shuddering, dust-seeping vase. The foul, sweet, rotten smell was back, so thick I could taste it at the back of my throat. I leaned forward, my face hovering over the dark, open mouth of the vessel. The inside wasn't empty. It wasn't wood. It wasn't a hollow space. It was a tunnel, a spiraling, fleshy tunnel that descended into an impossible depth. The walls of the tunnel were pulsating, a sickly, phosphorescent pink, veined with black, and they were covered in things. Small, writhing shapes that looked like blind, albino worms, but with tiny, human-like hands that clutched and grasped at the air. The whispers were coming from in there, from them. I saw, far down in that fleshy, spiraling hell, a single human eye. It was wide with terror, the pupil dilated, and it was staring right up at me. It was my own eye. I was looking at my own reflection from the bottom of that pit. A scream tore from my lungs, a raw, primal sound of utter despair. I stumbled back, scrambling away from the thing on my hands and knees, bile rising in my throat. The vase stopped shuddering. The dust stopped seeping. The whispers ceased. It was just a dark wooden vase sitting innocently on my floor. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner of my bedroom, sobbing and shaking. I was a prisoner in my own home. The sun rose, casting weak, grey light into the room. It was a new day, but the horror hadn't lessened. It had solidified. I had to get rid of it. The parasitic attachment was gone, burned away by the visceral terror of what I had seen. This thing wasn't just feeding on me, it was digesting me. It was a gateway to someplace else, someplace alive and hungry, and it was slowly pulling me in. I decided to take it out of the city, to a place so remote it couldn't possibly find its way back. I drove for 2 hours, deep into the state forest, down logging roads that became little more than dirt tracks. The vase was in a cardboard box on the passenger seat, and I could feel its cold malevolence seeping through the cardboard. The woods were dense and silent, the tall pines blocking out most of the sunlight. I found a ravine, a deep, rocky cut in the earth filled with ferns and debris. This was the place. I would smash it here, shatter it into 1,000 pieces, and bury the fragments. I took the box, my heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs, and climbed down into the ravine. The air was cool and damp. I set the box down, took a deep breath, and picked up a heavy, jagged rock. My hands were trembling. I opened the box and reached in for the vase. My fingers never touched the wood. A dozen of those pale, blind worms, just like the ones I'd seen inside the vase, erupted from the carvings. They were longer than I'd thought, each as thick as my finger, their blind heads questing, their tiny human hands scrabbling. They wrapped around my wrist, their grip impossibly strong, cold and slimy. I screamed and tried to pull away, but they held fast. More of them were emerging, a squirming pale mass flowing out of the vase's mouth. They began to crawl up my arm, their tiny fingers digging into my skin like barbs. The whispers were back, a triumphant, gloating chorus in my mind. "You are home, Dan. You are the vessel now." I dropped the rock and stumbled back, clawing at the things on my arm with my free hand. They were like rubbery steel cables. I fell to my knees, my vision swimming. The worms weren't just holding me, they were pulling. A gentle, inexorable tug towards the mouth of the vase. The world began to distort. The trees around the ravine seemed to stretch and warp, their colors bleeding into a monochrome gray. The sound of the wind became the sound of the whispers. I felt a profound, dizzying sense of vertigo, as if I were standing on the edge of a bottomless well. With a final, desperate surge of strength, I wrenched my body backward. There was a sickening, tearing sound. The worms on my arm lost their grip, retracting back into the vase with a sound like sucking mud. I was free. I didn't look back. I scrambled up the side of the ravine, my clothes torn, my skin scraped and bleeding. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled the key into the ignition, and I sped away, the tires spitting gravel, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. I drove for hours, a mindless flight, until the gaslight came on. I found a motel on the outskirts of a town I'd never heard of. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and collapsed on the bed, shaking uncontrollably. I had escaped. I had left it in the woods. It was over. That was 3 days ago. The first night in the motel, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in weeks. When I woke up, I felt a flicker of hope. The crushing fatigue was gone. The hollow feeling in my chest was receding. I was going to be okay. I went into the small, tiled bathroom to splash water on my face. I avoided the mirror at first, not wanting to see the wreck I had become. But when I finally looked up, I froze. The physical changes were reversing. The color was returning to my cheeks. The dark circles under my eyes were fading. I looked better, healthy, but there was something else. Just below my hairline, on my forehead, the skin was different. It was darker, rougher. I leaned in close to the mirror, my breath fogging the glass. It wasn't a bruise or a rash. The texture was unmistakable. It was grain, wood grain, and it was carved with the very same swirling, hypnotic pattern that covered the vase. A cold, bottomless horror swallowed me whole. I tore at my shirt, buttons popping and scattering across the floor. I looked at my chest, my arms. The pattern was there too, faint but undeniable, etched into my skin like a brand. It was spreading. I stumbled back into the main room and collapsed onto the bed, dry, heaving sobs racking my body. I hadn't escaped. I hadn't left it in the woods. The curse wasn't in the vase. The vase was just a seed, a catalyst. The curse was in me now. It had taken root. I was the new vessel. The worms, the whispers, the rotting smell, the terrible, fleshy interior. It was all inside me, growing, spreading, carving its pattern into my very flesh and bone. And last night, as I lay trembling in this cheap motel bed, I heard it again, the whispering. But this time, it wasn't coming from the air around me. It was softer, more intimate. It was a vibration, a resonance. It was coming from inside my own head. And this morning, when I coughed into my hand a fine black dust, just like the dust that seeped from the vase, coated my palm. It's only a matter of time now. I can feel the cold settling deep in my marrow. I can feel things moving, shifting inside me, rearranging my insides to suit their needs. The pattern on my skin is darker today, more pronounced. It's beautiful in a horrifying way. I find myself staring at it in the mirror for hours, lost in its terrible, intricate swirls. I don't know what happens when the transformation is complete. Will I become a new vase, sitting on a shelf somewhere, waiting for another lonely soul to take me home? Or will I simply become a gateway, my body tearing open to disgorge the pale, whispering things into this world? I bought a cursed vase from an antique shop. I thought I was bringing a piece of history into my home. I was wrong. I was bringing a home for history's oldest, hungriest tenants into my body. I regret it. God, I regret it. But soon, I don't think I'll be able to regret anything at all. Soon, I'll just be wood and whispers.